The Great Dying at the end of the Permian period. This figure represents all the species that were around before the Permian extinction at the end of the Permian. And something happened. So this lineup may be all the things that happened, because there's evidence supporting each one of these hypotheses as to what caused the Permian mass extinction. But the bottom line is, after the Permian extinction event, the fossil record shows decimation. Like 95% of the species in the oceans died and 70% on land. So that's why we call it the Great Dying. And we see a shift here in the kind of animals that survived from the ones that were around before. We see dominance of mobile, higher metabolism organisms. In other words, things that actually crawl around and find their own food, scavengers and predators. So we see an increase in those kinds of animals and a decrease in sessile, which means animals that just are attached and sit in one place and filter feed from the water. So they wait for food to come along, basically, instead of going out and actively finding it. So we see that shift from before the Permian extinction to after the Permian extinction. So the Permian extinction had an extinction in general. You'll see here as we go from extinction to extinction has a great effect on the kind of organisms that continue to evolve on the planet, or it's had a great effect on the evolution of life on this planet. So it's the largest mass extinction of all time. Like I said, 95% of aquatic species and about 70% of terrestrial species, terrestrial referring to on land. 4 possible causes: asteroid or comet strike, represented by this in the figure; supervolcano, represented by this in the figure. And you may have heard that there's one under Yellowstone Park. That Yellowstone Park is basically sitting on top of a supervolcano. That's why there's so much hydrothermal activity there. Release of toxic gases from the ocean floor. That's this part of the figure. And a change in continental configuration. And that's what this part of the figure has to do with. Or it might have been all 4. And it might have been one thing triggering the other things. For example, an asteroid or comet strike can trigger volcanic activity and gases being released. It's not going to change the continental configuration, but that was going on at the time. So this is not only the end of the Permian period, but also the Paleozoic Era. So geologists and paleontologists are using this event as a way to organize the geologic time scale, and they decided to make the end of the Paleozoic Era end with the Permian extinction. So now we're into a new era, the Mesozoic Era. Meso meaning middle. And the first period of the Mesozoic is the Triassic. And as you would imagine, the species that were around were the species that survived, right? The extant species. There's that word extant. So it included representatives of each major extant group, referring to the groups of animals and plants and fungi and everything that's alive today. Those groups are represented at this time after the Permian extinction and survived to this day. Not all the species, but the major groups. So the pattern of evolution that followed was what we call adaptive radiation, which is something we'll be talking about later when we look at patterns of evolution. But adaptive radiation is simply the idea that a mass extinction removes species from their niches, leaving niches available for other species to evolve into, right? So hopefully you understand that statement. So the species that survive, the extant species after an extinction event, evolved to take advantage of the niches that are available and left vacant by the previous species that were made extinct by the extinction event. The figure at the left shows Triassic proto-mammals. So remember, there were what some call mammal-like reptiles. I prefer the term proto-mammal. because they really weren't reptiles. And they kind of look like reptiles. Or, I'm sorry, they kind of look like mammals. Plants also evolved. A very important evolutionary advancement in plants, spores and pollen. I mean, you might think that, oh, well, all plants have pollen, all plants have spores. Well, not the mosses and liverworts and hornworts. Those first plants don't reproduce with pollen and seeds. And ferns and their relatives don't reproduce with pollen and seeds. They reproduce with spores. So this was a big evolutionary advancement because pollen helps plants reproduce without water, and seeds helps plants disperse far from the parent plant. And that's what this says. It increased their fitness. So following the Triassic, we move into the Jurassic, and the Jurassic is pretty much marked by the dominance of reptiles. It's referred to as the age of reptiles, and dominated by dinosaurs primarily, but dinosaurs weren't the only reptiles that were around. There were pterosaurs, which hopefully you understand are not dinosaurs, aquatic reptiles like ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs and mosasaurs, which we'll be looking at on the next slide if you want to see what they look like, that are not dinosaurs. Turtles, of course, and tortoises, which are not dinosaurs, and crocodilians, and the lizards and snakes that we now have around, all those animals, those reptiles that we now have around, were around back in the Jurassic, too. You don't hear much about them because the dinosaurs are so much more exciting, but they were all around. And, of course, mammals were around, too. Archaeopteryx is this fossil. This is an artist's version of what it might have looked like when it was alive. And it's also here on the phylogenetic tree. And you can see that it's a branch from the dinosaurs. This phylogenetic tree is showing the dinosaurs, except for the pterosaurs here, which is a separate branch. But these two major branches are the two major branches of dinosaurs. And birds, you'll see, are a branch of that. Class Aves. That's the birds. And like I said, mammals were represented here too, but the general idea and what the fossil record shows is that they were relatively small and nocturnal burrowers, which kind of makes sense because the dinosaurs dominated, and dinosaurs, being reptiles, were generally cold-blooded, had lower metabolisms, couldn't really be active that much during the nighttime. So that's when the mammals came out, right? They were nocturnal. They would come out at night and do their business at night, and in the daytime they would be hiding in burrows basically so they wouldn't be eaten by dinosaurs. There were some mammals around though that were preying on dinosaurs, so this isn't, like all mammals were nocturnal burrowers, but a lot of them were. As you know, after the Jurassic period we have the Cretaceous period, and dinosaurs were still dominant during the Cretaceous period. The lower left image shows those ichthyosaurs. That's the ichthyosaur, plesiosaur, and by the way, those that believe there might be a Loch Ness monster hypothesize that it might be a plesiosaur that somehow survived the extinction of the dinosaurs. Doubt it. And this thing called a mosasaur, spoiler alert, plays a big role in one of the Jurassic Park movies. But those are not dinosaurs, along with pterosaurs. So just because it ends in saur doesn't mean it's a dinosaur. And by the way, saur simply means lizard. So they refer to all these things because they're reptilian as lizard, but they're obviously not lizard-like, not all of them. The evolutionary advancement in the plant kingdom was flowers. And you might think to yourself, well, I thought all plants had flowers. No, not all plants are flowering plants. There are different groups of plants, and flowers didn't evolve until the Cretaceous period. So the flowers are the most recent evolutionary advancement in plants. And that was an extremely successful evolutionary advancement because it increased the fitness by allowing for dispersal of pollen, or animals carrying pollen from flower to flower. So flowers basically evolved to take advantage of animals and use animals to transfer pollen from flower to flower. And then flowers, I don't know if you know this, but flowers turn into fruit. And the fruit also evolved to take advantage of animals, because animals will come along and eat the fruit, and in the process they open up the fruit and disperse the seeds, or they even swallow the seeds, and the seeds travel through their digestive tract and they go and poop them out someplace far from the parent plant. So it's a way of dispersal, dispersing the seeds, moving them away from the parent plant. So evidence suggests, and there's a lot of evidence, the Smoking Gun being a huge crater off the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, that the Cretaceous period ended in a mass extinction. And of course, mass extinction is what paleontologists and geologists use to mark the end of eras, and in this case the Cretaceous period at the end of the Mesozoic Era. So following the Cretaceous extinction at the end of the Mesozoic Era, we begin the Cenozoic Era, which is the era we now enjoy. You'll note that this goes to the present. And just like all mass extinctions, the extant species, the ones that survived, that didn't go extinct, were able to adaptively radiate and fill available niches. Well, in this case, one of the major groups that was around after the Cretaceous extinction, because probably they were warm-blooded and lived in burrows, they were able to survive the extinction event that the dinosaurs couldn't survive, and they adaptively radiated and filled the niches that were made available by the removal of the dinosaurs. So I hope you're seeing a pattern here, that extinction results in the adaptive radiation of extant groups that were left behind after the extinction event to evolve and fill available niches. That happens after every extinction event, all 5 extinction events. And again, we'll be looking at that as a pattern of evolution pretty soon. So the dominant terrestrial animals during the Cenozoic are the mammals. Then it's often referred to as the age of the mammals. And again, we are currently in the age of the mammals. We are mammals, and we definitely dominate, just like the dinosaurs dominated. But just like the dinosaurs, we could be removed by a mass extinction event. So we're currently in the Cenozoic Era, the Quaternary period, right? And the Holocene epoch. But this period, this era, period, and epoch seems to be ending with mass extinction, just like other eras and periods, and not all the periods are divided up into epochs, but there's a mass extinction event going on right now, the 6th mass extinction. There have been 5 mass extinctions in the past, and it looks like our 6th extinction is taking place right now, and the reason why has to do with human activity. So some propose that we are now in a new epoch, marked by our own geologic footprint. In other words, the effect that we've had on the planet since we've been here. And so just kind of imagine thousands, millions even of years in the future, if there's anything like a paleontologist around, or a alien paleontologist comes to the Earth, or aliens come to the Earth, and they're investigating our past by digging up fossils, they may find our footprint being an increase in radiation and toxins and habitat destruction, and of course extinction. And so some propose that we are now in a new epoch known as the Anthropocene. Anthro, like anthropology, is the study of humans, so anthro refers to humans, and it ends in the same thing as the other scene, right? Holocene, Anthropocene. Kind of a sad thing to think about. So the Cenozoic Era starts with the Tertiary period, and the Tertiary period, the climate became warmer and drier and more mild. And, whenever the Earth changes, species evolve and change with the changing Earth. So these climate changes triggered changes, evolutionary changes in the animals that were here. So grasses evolved. Grasses, just like it sounds surprising that there were no flowering plants at one time or seed-producing plants, grasses are a relatively recent evolutionary development. And grasses covered vast areas just like they do today, grasslands. But that began in the Tertiary period. And grasses are flowering plants. So they supported vast herds of grazing mammals. So we got this huge food source for grazing mammals, and grazing mammals took off as a result. So like woolly mammoths. But whales evolved during this time, and humans evolved during this time. The grasses allowed for the woolly mammoths to graze. Loss of forests in Africa caused our ancestors to stand upright, basically. And food may have become scarce on land, so whale ancestors may have evolved to become aquatic for that reason. So here's, the skeleton, the fossil of a very early whale ancestor. And here's what an artist's version of what it might have looked like. Kind of like a mammalian crocodile. Then in the Cenozoic era and the Quaternary period of the Cenozoic era, following the Tertiary, the climate cooled, producing a series of glacial periods. So glacial periods and then interglacial periods, and then glacial periods and then interglacial periods. So a series of glacial periods, right? Glaciers came and went. And as you're probably aware, where we are right now in Kent, Ohio, was covered with a couple miles of ice at one time because the glaciers came down this far, and a lot of the topography of the surrounding area, is the result of glaciation, and the Great Lakes themselves are the result of glaciation. So this happened during the Quaternary period. We now enjoy an interglacial period in between glaciation that began at the beginning of the Holocene, about 10,000 years ago. And due to global warming, climate change, it may continue indefinitely. And that might be another lasting effect of our activity on this planet that, contributes to our footprint, and the whole idea of referring to the epoch that we're now in as the Holocene. I'm sorry, as we're in the Holocene now, referring to it as the Anthropocene. So, representative species of this time, saber-toothed cats, armadillo relative Doodicarus, and you can see one of these if you go to the Cleveland Natural History Museum. They have a fossil of one of these, and they're huge. So the humans shown here, to give you some idea of the size of these things, they were huge. And the giant sloth, also huge. And I remember going to the Natural History Museum with my daughter when she was just very young, and they have a skeleton of one of these standing very similar to this, and she was petrified of it, scared of it. Speaking of being scared, the terror bird was big enough and a predator, and would actually chase down and eat children, human children. So you can imagine being alive at this time, because humans were alive at this time, being afraid of your children being carried away by a terror bird. And the idea here is that there were more large mammals in North America than there are now in Africa. And the question is, what happened to them? Well, it's been proposed that it's due to humans hunting them for food, but also being afraid of them. And you can imagine these saber-toothed cats and the terror bird, it'd be pretty scary, and so you'd want to wipe them out. If they were around your settlement or where you were trying to make a living, you wouldn't want them around, so you would kill them. So that brings us up to the present, and next we'll look at patterns of evolution.